You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 87. Today I'll be talking to Ben Ashton. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes complete with show notes at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at Art Affairs Podcast. Before I introduce today's guest, I wanted to take a moment to let folks know about a wonderful opportunity that's currently open to artists within the community, courtesy of Neil Perry, co-founder of Antler and Talon Galleries in Portland, as well as Annie Owens and Attaboy from High Fructose magazine. After the tragic passing of Susanna Kelly, who I had on the show way back in, episode 13, and definitely check that out if you haven't already for a glimpse of just how amazing Susanna was. But following her passing in the summer, Neil, her husband, started gathering funds to pay her a lasting tribute, one that would reflect her kindness and generosity to the community she loved so much. That tribute ultimately manifested in the Susanna Kelly Art Award, an annual award that aims to uplift artists in the same way that Susanna always did. They're currently accepting entries in 3 different categories: drawing, painting, and sculpting, and winners for each category will receive a $2,000 stipend, a solo exhibition at Antler Gallery later in the year, and have their work featured in High Fructose magazine. Now, at the point where this episode comes out, the deadline for entry will actually be pretty close, March 22nd. So if you're listening and you're an artist, definitely check out the website to get more details on how to enter. You can find out more at SusannaKellyArtAward.com. All right, so today's guest is artist Ben Ashton. In recent years, Ben has become most well known for the extremely visceral distortions that he integrates into his otherwise beautifully rendered portrait pieces. It's such a powerful motif, and one that seemingly is continuing to evolve and amplify. But of course, Ben didn't start there. His art was actually very different in the early days of his career. Well, kind of. You can definitely see a through line from where he started to where he is now, and we talk all about that evolution and how it took place on the show. We also talk about how important history and art history is to Ben, and how in a lot of ways it's informed the work that he makes today. We also talk about his upcoming solo show in Rome, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ben Ashton. Ben, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on, man.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
And shout out to Kirsten from Rock LaRue. She actually, at the end of the show, I always ask, who is the one person that you'd like to see me have on in the future? And you were the person that she named when I had a conversation with her.
Wow, that's high praise from Kirsten. Yeah, she's a wonderful gallerist.
Yeah, amazing. And the program that she's put on for all these years is incredible. But let's talk about your background a little bit. And I know that you born and grew up in London, where you've lived pretty much all your life, as far as I understand. What was that area like specifically where you grew up? Was it really in the heart of the city, or was it a little bit more out on the outskirts? Or
Well, it's interesting, actually. So it's the first 5 years of my life. That's when I spent time in South London in a place called Catford, a relatively impoverished area when I was there. So it's not particularly central. It's sort of southeast. And then, I have sort of a few vague memories of that particular point in time. But I've always considered myself kind of a Londoner as a result of that, of being in that area. But, you know, my mum got a job. She's a teacher. She got a job as the head of creative arts faculty in a big secondary school. And so that's why we moved out of London. And yeah, it was interesting, the difference in culture when moving out of London and moving into a place in the home counties, Buckinghamshire, where I spent my teenage years, and that's where I got this accent. So yeah, I wouldn't have this accent if I had stayed in Catford. You know,
it's so different. How? I mean, in what way were they different?
So it was very multicultural in London. And, you know, I moved back to London after, you know, I went to university in Newcastle first, which is right at the opposite end of the country in the north. And then when I came down, did my master's, I moved straight back to London at that point because I really wanted to get back to it. But yes, it's very multicultural in London. They're quite liberal, I suppose. People are fairly liberal-minded. And so, yeah, moving to the countryside, definitely only white people. And I noticed that apparently as a child, not that I can recall really. My parents often said that I mentioned it, going, where's all the vibrancy? And, you know, yeah, so that was the main difference, I think. Yeah. And I think my parents found it strange as well. You know, they were the only liberal people in the village. But, you know, I think they got seen as sort of the liberal mascots in a very conservative village. So, yeah, I think it's actually quite funny for them in the end.
Yeah, I mean, you're leading the trend. But you mentioned your mother and that she was the head of a creative department in a school. But your father was also an artist. So it seems like, you know, with both of your parents kind of in the arts, is it something that you just had around you all the time at such a young age?
Yes. It seemed like a possibility as a profession, you know, whereas maybe other children didn't have that. Not that they suggested that I should become an artist. They didn't think that was a particularly great idea because
really,
you know, what they said was that, you know, there's no money in it. And as a child, I quite liked things. And they were like, well, you know, you won't be able to afford things when you become an artist. So I was like, oh, well, all right. And so, you know, I wasn't sure about it either, but it just seemed to be something that I was just naturally interested in anyway. But, you know, my dad's is an abstract painter, sort of devoted his life to the golden section, as in the way of dividing up a canvas into a series of harmonious triangular shapes. And so he dedicated his entire life to that. So that's all around the Fibonacci series of numbers. And yeah, fascinating. You know, since coming out of college, he's dedicated his life purely to that, which is intriguing.
So with your parents not like actively encouraging you to go into the arts and questioning its viability as a career, how did you like individually become interested in pursuing art? Just, you know, how did that spark ignite in you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was sort of jumping through creative hoops, I suppose, for quite a long time, as far as the educational creative hoops. So I was interested in being a musician and being an actor at other points, but then I decided that I could probably combine all those things into an artistic career. And so it was a way of like not limiting myself. And I felt like I could express myself properly as an artist in both those ways if I wanted to. But it was only when I actually got to university I actually started taking it seriously as a thing that I was going to do. I think probably second year I started going, right, okay, well, I better concentrate now and do this properly.
And that was at Newcastle. You mentioned earlier you went to Newcastle. Was it there that you kind of had that, I guess you came to the recognition that you needed to kind of nail down what you wanted to do?
Yes, that's right. And, you know, I've got quite an addictive personality. So I started taking it, when I really started taking it seriously, I just lived and breathed it, and that was it. I didn't really do a lot of socializing. I was in the studio continuously, and I think people thought I was weird. My girlfriend at the time thought I was having an affair. I just wasn't coming home much. I was just constantly doing that.
Who's the other woman? Well, it's the art.
Yeah, I was a dreadful boyfriend. Absolutely horrendous. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
And so why Newcastle specifically? What was it about that school that attracted you?
Well, so when I was doing my art foundation, that was in Abingdon, just outside of Oxford. It was one of the courses that the person suggested that was running the show. He suggested other ones like Birmingham and Bristol being another one that and I looked at, three of them, and Newcastle, there's a sort of a sense of the industrial north when you get up there, these great big wrought iron bridges when you go across. Everything's very grand. The architecture's grand. And it was just so far away from home. I thought that was very interesting. Well, as far away from home as you get in England. I mean, like everything's very close by. But it was there was a massive culture shock yet again, because the people from Newcastle, they're called Geordies, have very thick accents and a completely different way of life. You get ostracized for wearing too much clothing up there. It's a much colder place. Yeah, and you get harangued if you're on the street and you're wearing a jacket. You're not supposed to do that, especially as a guy. It's like very, yeah, you get in trouble.
Wow.
I got famously beaten up in Newcastle for just wearing a backpack.
For wearing too much clothes?
I was wearing a backpack. I was coming home from college one night, and I didn't notice there was a group of guys that were drinking like a strong cider on a park bench. I should have actually walked in a different direction, but I went past, and they decided to kick the shit out of me. So yeah, that was fun.
That's wild. How do you feel about the art program at Newcastle?
Great. It was really good. They left you to your own devices. They had huge studios. It was one of the first purpose-built art departments outside of London. So massive windows, huge Victorian building. Can't recommend it enough. It was so much better up there than it was in the Slade when it got down to London, where everything's compact and you're fighting for space in an environment like that. Everything's very open plan in the Slade as well. There was no dividing doors or anything. You didn't have your own room. You had you part of a big space where you all had to see what you were doing, which was cool. There was a different ethos, but I really liked having my own space in Newcastle. That was cool. And it was only really the crits that you saw the tutors. Apart from that, they just left you to it. And you forged great friendships with the various other people that were studying alongside you. Lots of very interesting people. Brilliant. It was a brilliant course.
Do you feel that they, or did they provide you like exposure to the gallery art world specifically, like giving you opportunities to show in a gallery setting while you were there?
Oh no. I mean, I think that's what they do in England, is they try and not really talk about what you do when you leave college. It's about trying to figure out your practice, where you stand in the whole art world, and trying to defend a lot of your ideas in rigorous criticism, which is interesting in its own right. But they certainly don't teach you how to paint or do anything, and they don't prepare you for your life as an artist outside of college. Something, and I think there's a certain degree of, well, we had to figure out ourselves. So best of luck to you. I think there's a certain element like, and I've always gone against the idea of being a teacher myself. I would hate to be. I wouldn't like to put myself in that position where I was suggesting things to young people, young impressionable people. I prefer not to be that person.
So do you like that approach where they don't really focus as much about life after college, or do you wish that they had incorporated some of that into the curriculum?
Well, yeah, maybe it would have been useful. I don't know. Yeah, it probably would have been kind of handy. I have students getting in touch with me now, and I give them what I think to be some relatively sound advice as to what to do. A lot of the time it's very hard because it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. Right. It's everybody has their own way of going through this. I don't pretend to know the answers. I just know how I did it, and a lot of it is to do with social media and putting your stuff out there as much as you can. That's usually what I suggest to people, but they might find their own way. But I think it's rather lovely that people feel like I actually know something that I can tell them. I think
Well, and I mean the landscape changes so quickly. It's hard to nail down a solid curriculum if everything's evolving so constantly, you know.
Absolutely. You know, the life as an artist that I was expecting outside of college when I finished in 2008, finishing my master's, that is, it was completely different. You'd hopefully court a gallery in Mayfair, with, you know, hopefully with some sort of degree of success, and you would stay with one gallery and that would be it. It's not like that anymore.
Right.
And social media has changed that. I don't really show in my native country. I show all over the world. I feel like England's very behind the times as to what's really going on as trends in the art world as well. Which is, I'm very pleased to be able to show in the US and showing in Rome next, which is fun.
And so you mentioned Slade and moving back to London to pursue your master's degree. What motivated that decision to continue your education and go on to grad school?
I felt like being in London was the best place to be, sort of the best place to leave college. It would give me the best chance of getting somewhere. That's where everything seems to gravitate towards, is London. And to be honest, it's losing its edge now, I feel, in a funny sort of way. And it's harder to exist there than it ever has been. It's so expensive. But I had it in my mind that was the best place. If I was going to leave college and get in front of the right sort of eyes to help me into the first part of my existence as an artist, that would be the best place to position myself. And it was, you know, I got with galleries, so that was fun. They weren't the galleries for me. And, you know, some of the experiences were quite damaging in a funny sort of way. But, you know, it's still experiences. You always have to have trial and error in this life.
Yeah. Well, and so moving back to London is one part of it, but actually going to grad school, like that's another level, like just the commitment to continue your career and your education in that way. What did you hope that grad school and a master's program would add to your, repertoire?
I just saw it as another 2 years. I think, you know, the more space and the more time that you've got to just focus on you and your work, the better, quite honestly, you know, because there's other things in life like trying to earn money and all this other stuff that you're going to get to it eventually. But, you know, it's just nice having that space and time and to be around other similar-minded people. You know, and they did have a really interesting ethos at the Slade. And it was the main tutor, the painting tutor, was Bruce McLean, who was have you ever heard of him? He was a performance artist, mainly. Back in the 70s, he became big. He also did some paintings that I don't think they're particularly great, but, you know, he also did some paintings. He was not a great painting tutor, but a very amusing man with lots of very interesting anecdotes. But the main bit of advice he'd always give you was do it bigger. And that was it. Which was very funny. But yeah, he wouldn't tell you anything about painting as such. But, you know, I think the British school system is full of people with those sort of weird idiosyncrasies that are a bit weird.
And so you mentioned that the ethos was different a couple times between Slade and Newcastle. In what way did they approach like the education of art differently?
So, as I said, it was an open plan studio. There was no walls. That was part of it. Everybody should be aware of what everybody else is doing all of the time. That's interesting. Also, they didn't see themselves as a finishing school. Whereas, say, the Royal Academy or the Royal College would actually say, I'm preparing you to be a fully formed artist by the end of this, go out into the art world and be famous and stuff. Right. Whereas they saw their job as trying to give you the tools to keep on coming up with different ideas, which is actually valuable education. Yeah. Because that's a real worry sometimes, you know? Losing your sort of, you know, the reason for doing things, you know, getting stuck, all of these things. I mean, it happens all the time, but they did actually give you some good coping strategies for that, and always seeing other things as the work, not just what you're doing here. Maybe there's other avenues that are coming off here that you're not aware of that could also possibly be the work.
So making a more well-rounded artist out of you, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So you ultimately graduated in 2008. All in all, I guess the sum total of your education, would you recommend it to somebody in 2024 if they're considering art school?
Well, I've certainly been asked this question a few times by people that are coming up to deciding what they're doing for university, and I don't have a clear answer for them. And it's mainly to do with the amount of money spent on education now. And I don't think it's right for people to become that poor and impoverished and, stacked up with loans at such an early age of your existence. It's just frankly quite depressing. And I don't think it's correct just to, be educated. I feel more people should be highly educated in this world, and I think we should actually encourage it instead of making it seem so bloody difficult. So, yeah. And
so in the absence of that, if they wanted to just go at their own, what advice would you have in that case? Just focus on the fundamentals, or?
I would, focus on what you can do that other people can't, what you feel like the world is lacking, do what you love, and get it out there in any way, shape, form you can. And that's it, really. Stay in contact with lots of different people and socialise properly. Don't be always in your studio. But yeah, concentrate on the work. Make the work good. People often respond to that.
Awesome. Very cool. So after school, after you graduated, what kind of work did you do just on the other side? Did you jump right into your personal practice, or did you do other kinds of work to kind of pay the bills?
Well, I was quite lucky. So when I was finishing Newcastle, there was 2 London galleries that got in touch that saw my final show, and they started selling my work over the that holiday period between the Newcastle and the Slade. And I sold basically all the back catalogue of stuff that I created at Newcastle, which allowed me to exist in London without having to work. I didn't have any loan or anything getting to my master's, so I needed money in some way. So I was very, very fortunate to sell a whole bunch of work. And then after that, I was going to have my first solo show with one of the galleries, but then I got poached by another person who became my agent for another few years after that. And he basically, it was in the contract for me going with him, was the fact that he was going to give me a studio in central London in Bloomsbury.
Okay.
As a base, essentially. And he didn't have a gallery, so he was just selling my work out of the studio, and we did some sort of satellite kind of project spaces, one in an old sort of stonemasons on Brick Lane, and that was my first solo show that I had with him in 2009.
Is that Simon Oldfeld?
That's Oldfield, that's correct, yeah, him.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and that worked quite well for about 3 years, but, I felt like he was then relying on his secondary market sales to make money. He found it very, very difficult. You remember the 2008 recession hit just as I finished my bloody course.
Good timing.
And yeah, I know, it was great. Straight into that one. And so, yeah, I think, he was finding it very difficult to shift emerging artists' work as well. It was difficult. So I felt like he was a bit disordered in what he was doing. He was also quite controlling of what I did. If he didn't like what I was doing, he said he wasn't going to show it. And I was doing a whole bunch of different work at that point. I was annoyed. And I think the final straw is I made my own website. And he was furious that I did so.
Really?
Yeah, he was really angry. He said, "Oh, I was trying to show myself as an independent artist," and
wow.
He was like, "Why didn't you mention me more in your CV?" And I'm like, "Well, but I copied it from your website, so it's the same CV."
Wow.
And you should, yeah. Anyway, so that was the end. I was like, okay, fine, maybe I should be an independent artist then.
Wow. So it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about the old think, I guess, is the way that I'll frame it, of the gallery community in London, and how it tends to be a little stifling and controlling, where you're signing contracts that lock you in for a certain period of time. Yeah,
totally. It was a lot like that, and the contracts would roll yearly. Annually, and so I'd have a fresh contract to sign, and especially because I was staying in this apartment that he essentially owned as well. So we moved out of the apartment. I met my wife. I think that was another catalyst to ending our relationship. so my wife it's got a great deal of common sense and just saw what was going on as not good, and told me that, and I was like, oh, but it was hugely worrying doing that, just jumping ship like that.
For sure.
Because even though it wasn't really working out, it was still very worrying to go it alone. I still had no idea what I was doing. And I was a few years in the wilderness before I figured it out. So,
yeah, I mean, no matter how bad the sure thing is, walking away from that sure thing can be difficult. Even though you're going to end up in a better place, the uncertainty of that can be a source of anxiety. You mentioned meeting your wife, and wasn't that your first solo show that you guys?
Yes.
So there actually was something good that came out of that, that time,
yes.
I guess.
Oh yeah. As I said, the first 3 years they were good. He had great drive actually at the beginning of it, because he was really on the make. He was trying to, and I think he got a bit too comfortable actually in the way that he was doing things. So I really loved the first few years. But yes, we did meet. So Fiona is Canadian, but with 2 English parents. But she modelled earlier on in her life. So went around various parts of Europe, modelled in Paris, Milan, and London. And she loved London back in the 90s because it was a fun place back in the 90s. It was full of possibilities and positivity. Yes, very unlike now. And so she thought, all right, okay, well, I want to pursue photography. She got as far as she could in Vancouver, where she was, and she wanted to go to a big kind of metropolitan city, and so she moved to Brick Lane. That's where my show was. She was drinking coffee in a coffee shop that overlooked the gallery, so she was kind of getting to see the work every day. And she kind of, when people were visiting her, she would visit the gallery and show them the exhibition. I got talking to her there. And the rest is history. Yeah, we had a very quick first date. We were married within a year. It was crazy.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of breaking away from that relationship and becoming independent. How did you, in those early days of kind of going out on your own, how did you start making some of those other gallery relationships that have been more enduring and, I guess, gain international recognition?
Well, that happened a bit later. So I had my next solo show after finishing everything with Simon in 2016. And that was a small gallery in Camden. And I realised at that point that they didn't really know what they were doing as far as... And it's a lot of like the blind leading the blind with the galleries, I think, a lot of the time. Unless they've got a clear sense of what they're about and got a decent client base, I don't think these guys were particularly together on that one. And it did not sell very well. The only painting I sold was still one of my previous clients.
Oh,
who came. Yeah, it was a massive failure. Huge. And depressed me a lot at the time. But you learn from those things. Yeah. And after that, that's when I think I started posting stuff more on Instagram and figuring things out like that. And it's mainly through social media that I've met all the people that I have met and gained some really lovely relationships with wonderful gallerists like Kirsten. Who are very supportive and wonderful.
And they just reach out to you through the social media channels that you have?
Yeah, well, they don't tend to do it on Instagram. Some of them do, but yeah, they'll just email you from that. They'll find you from that. And it's from that. And sometimes it's from other galleries that are on their network. So if you show with one of these galleries, then the other gallerists go, oh, that guy's been showing with that person and it looks all right. And they give you a shot. And it usually starts with a group show. You're included in a group show. If they sell that piece and they like what you do, then they'll offer you like maybe be part of a 4-person show. And then after that, maybe a solo show.
Yeah. Now, it's so critical to find those kind of really solid gallery relationships because, to your point, even to this day, there's still a lot out there that don't really have the artist's best interest in mind,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But once you do find those ones that are really working for you, those are special relationships,
Yeah, and I quite like working with niche galleries. I don't want to work with a behemoth because I don't want to ever get into the position of having people buy my work as just an investment,
right?
Where they're just going to shove it in a a container somewhere and then auction it off in another 10 years. That's not what I want. I want, collectors that really love the work and they're proud to have it on their walls. I think that's important. And often the gallerists are, they really value their collector network and they really value their artists.
Yeah.
And that's lovely.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the work itself. And I think the first thing that I kind of wanted to discuss with you is the evolution that your work and your style has, undergone throughout the course of your career. Because, I tend to kind of take a holistic look when I'm, reading up on somebody and look at the progression of the work throughout the multiple stages of a person's career. And I found it fascinating to kind of look through your entire body of work because it's definitely gone through these substantial periods of evolution. And it's interesting to see that kind of trajectory in a glimpse, So I wanted to explore that with you a little bit. And it started with 2009. You had really, realistic self-portraits. I see a lot of parallels with that and what you're doing today as far as like costumes. You had, very rich costumes without the distortions that you've incorporated today, but they were you and, different versions of yourself. And then in 2011, it changed dramatically and went to more intimate settings of your personal life, a glimpse at your family life. And then 2016 was like a real big turning point. I kind of marked that as like, wow, this is going in a completely different direction. And this is really kind of the first time that you seem to have integrated, elements of surrealism into your work with these really ornate masks. And that was the King is Dead show.
That's right. Yeah.
A much more, it's kind of a surrealistic bent to it. And then 2021, it felt to me, and I'm not sure if this is fair to say, but it felt to me like you were taking pieces of that 2016 show, kind of the more surreal and light-bending aesthetic that was part of that show, and combining it with the original focus of history and costumed portraiture. And so this, in your 2021 show, To Our Glorious Future, that's really started to establish what I would say is your current state, your current form, where you had, you went back to this portraiture style in costume portraits of you and your family, but started to incorporate these distortions that you've obviously become very well known for. And then 2023 was an evolution of that even further, and you started having these unique custom panels, and it was sort of an expansion of that idea and building on that. So, it seemed to me like that 2016 show was really this in-between state, this state of transition for you, where you were starting to explore a more surreal posture. And then with the 2021 show, introducing the distortion element that's become, obviously a big part of your work today. So talk me through that evolution. How did that evolution take place in those different stages of your career? What motivated those different transformations?
Yeah, well, I think I've always been interested in history. History's been like a massive part of my interest. So, and being in museums, and so the National Portrait Gallery has been sort of the bedrock, really. Of I feel safe in museums. I feel safe in history. Because it's all happened before. There's a lot of worry about the future. It's a nice place to be. But I have a kind of an irreverent look at it. Basically, I've always treated it with reverency. And so, the first show was me sort of mimicking these sort of various anti-heroes throughout, British portraiture history, basically. And I find portraiture generally as a very there's a wonderful lineage to it. There's always been portraiture. There's always been rich patrons. There's always been portrait painters to paint them, and that's been a good source of income for artists. And so lots of the time, the only thing that we're really left with as far as a visual image of what these people look like is their portrait that they commissioned and putting a silly pose. And so I really like that that was something that my first solo show was all about. Then, I moved, when I met my wife, I think I was interested in showing the beginning of our relationship together. That was very important. She's a massive collaborator, and I've always worked with my wife to create things. which I love. I think that's a strong part of our relationship and why we work so well as a creative couple. And so that was showing that the birth of our relationship, but using the sort of Dutch genre style of painting as a way of showing that. So those were those intimate scenes. The King is Dead series, that was a big break from that. And as you're right to say, we were collaborating with my wife with various other creatives, and so the person making these masks was a great creative called Damselfrau, a Norwegian artist, and we started collaborating with her. And I just love the masks and the fact that it removed me from it as well. So you become a different character when you put the mask on. I really liked sort of removing myself from the work because it would all been very me heavy. I come from a performance art background, so this is why I naturally use myself as people often ask, why do you do this? And I'm like, well, I'm always around, aren't I? I'm always there, and I always just use myself, my wife, the people in my family, and people that can't get too annoyed with you, which is, they can, but they can't just tell you to fuck off, can they? So it's, so I think that's probably why I do it so much. And, I, as an actor uses their body as a tool to do a thing, that's how I see myself using myself in these things. Anyway, so the King is Dead series seemed a bit serious, though, after a while. All the rest of the work had been kind of slightly humorous, and I felt like that was missing in that series. It was quite dark. It was round about the birth of my son as well, so it was a nice sort of interesting point in my sort of life, and the life of our family. So that was rather wonderful. And you see him as a baby in that series. And then after that, big political upheaval that happened, Brexit happened. Right. I got very annoyed by all of that, and I'm still annoyed. But I use art to make me sort of laugh at everything and see it with great humour. And so that's when I started wanting to distort these things that as I said, I've always been slightly irreverent towards history. However, I still love it, and I think I feel safe within it. So I think I was trying to take something that I would normally see as safe, and especially a part of British history that has been always seen as safe. Because during the Brexit referendum, politicians were like, we want to move back to more sort of days of empire. We want to remove ourselves from Europe and see ourselves on our own. It's like, it was nonsense. But because it was put in sort of a patriotic way, and they were talking about moving back to something where we were great at one point, which we were never, we had a very brief period where things moved our way because it was mainly to do with the Industrial Revolution more than anything else. But it wasn't great for everyone. It was great for a few people. It wasn't, And so, I thought that it would be good just to completely take the piss out of all of that. So so that's when I started painting people from the Regency era, and messing their faces up. And it's sort of become a visual language since then.
Yeah. So mainly to kind of question the rose-colored glasses that a lot of people were looking at history through?
Yes, it was. That was the initial reason. It was. But it offers, often when something starts with that sort of point, it's sort of a jumping off point, and it soon just becomes part of the way that I like to create now. And so, it's just become part of the work. And it's funny because it's the first time that anyone actually started caring about what I was doing, really, en masse. And so that's when I started meeting Garrett. And it's when I decided that, the whole world had gone to shit and this is what I was going to do. And it was all just, it was a sort of it was sort of a childish sort of, I was doing it out of spite. And so, it's just funny that is the thing that people were like, oh,
right. That resonated with people. I think what you plugged into was a general distaste or dissatisfaction with the current state of the world from everybody.
Yeah. There's a lot to be dissatisfied with. Really and truly now, I just see like humanity, we've just become so idiotic, and, we're all complicit in this in some way. Even though I complain about all of it, I'm still part of it. And, this is my way of alleviating the anxiety in a more of a therapeutic way, and hopefully everybody can have a good laugh at it. I don't take it particularly seriously, which is important to because some people come at me going, oh, what is this sentimental drivel? Like, it's like, yes, it is it is very much that. It is sentimental, and it is silly and nonsensical sort of nostalgia. That's what it is. It's supposed to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely see a kind of a dark humor element in some of your work. So I guess what role do you feel that humor plays in what you create?
It's pretty much all of it. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much the reason for it. When it comes to the execution, I take that seriously to a point. I do really want to make it but that's how you tell a good joke. It's all about execution. So unless it has that element of seriousness in the production of it, it doesn't come off well. I don't think so.
Yeah, you have to respect the humor. I mean, if you're not doing your best to execute, then you're not respecting it.
Precisely. Yes, that's very well put.
You talked about your use of yourself, your family as the inspiration or as the subjects of your work, which I think anybody looking at your portfolio across all of your shows, that's been the case. Was that a decision that you made early on?
Yeah, I suppose so. I believe in setting limitations on myself, and through doing that, what can you do with that? I like that, and it's through setting limitations, and it can be in palette or it can be in the people that you're using. It's sort of, there's a wonderful kind of imagination that you have to use to actually do something different with that every time, And so, I think that's partly it. There was also, I think after my first solo show, I think there was a critic that said, oh, you clearly can't keep doing that, just using yourself.
I'll show you.
So I just did it just to spite him. So, yeah.
I love that. Well, I mean, it's also interesting because, if you continue doing that consistently, it kind of shows you guys throughout the course of time and how you all evolve both individually and together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find that really interesting. I've often found, artists like Rembrandt really fascinating because you see him throughout his life with various self-portraits. And you get to sort of learn stuff about his wife, his various marriages that he had, how rubbish it was that he lost, wives and his son, and both wives and his son by the end of his life, and he was still sort of painting himself. Hopefully none of that happens to me, touch wood. But it meant that you got to see this sort of chronological order. And if there was a retrospective of my work, then you would see that, and that would be cool.
And so you mentioned spending a lot of time in the National Gallery and the importance that, the comfort that you find in history. I guess, what do you feel has been the value of gaining such a deep, and intimate familiarity or understanding with history and these various periods of time?
Well, it sort of made the sort of chronological order of art as a sort of an index in my mind that I can draw upon at will, which is nice. I will always see links between what's going on now and what's happened 100 years ago, because we're stupid humans and we make mistakes continually, and we make the same mistakes, and it's sadly it's all just seems to be cyclical. And so I'd rather like that drawing those comparisons. That's fun. And I think it, as I said, it's a place of contemplation and I feel like it's a meditative thing, just standing in front of the same paintings that I've stood in front of for decades, and seeing new things that I find interesting about them. When I stand in front of those paintings, I'm not even seeing the painting anymore, I don't think. I'm just seeing inside of my own head and possibilities. It sparks new things. It's a bit like, we have the most ideas when we're either in the shower or going to sleep, or, going through the motions of something. Because I've done it so many times, it means that's the perfect place for my brain to work. No,
that's great. And you're absolutely right. Just the way that we don't learn our lessons as human beings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's all a weird and rather dark circle at times. So, talking about your process a little bit, how do you arrive at your ideas for new works? I mean, you mentioned just a little bit about the spark of inspiration that can come from doing mundane things or things that you've done for long periods of time. But do you have any kind of intentional like brainstorming activities to develop new ideas?
Not really intentionally. I mean, to be honest, nowadays I'm having like a solo show every year, and so I've got to come up with a new thing every year, or some sort of evolution from what I was previously doing, and that's bloody difficult. And that I find those soul searching points where you're coming up with it, I find that the most difficult, because you're not going through the therapeutic motion of painting. You're coming up with, you take a good hard look in the mirror, both metaphorically and actually, and go, shit, right, okay, what am I actually interested in now? What am I really trying to say now? So, the fascination with the Rococo thing was, that was the last show I did with Kirsten, and that was sort of based on the sort of, because the Rococo period is just before the French Revolution, and high frippery prior to a massive collapse of societal, like massive, everything went tits up.
And the show was called Before a Fall, which is like perfectly named. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm seeing this period as that sort of period, You've got the tech billionaires, a huge concentration of wealth just in their pockets. You're seeing everybody else broke and in trouble, and it will come to a point where it's just, there's the breaking point. And we're seeing that in various sort of political decisions and stupid political decisions that people make, especially with the amount of disinformation, misinformation going around. And so they're angry. They're like, what are they really who are they angry at? And I would say it should probably be the very, very rich people. Probably.
You would think
that's so. What I reckon. Yeah, I reckon that's the real thing. That's a real problem. It's the fact that the wealth is not spread around properly. That's probably the issue. And so, that was like that show. At the moment, I'm focusing on, it is more sort of ideas of the sort of downfall of civilization a little bit, focusing more on sort of contemplative portraiture, but all the way throughout history. So in fact, it harkens back to my first solo show. I'm looking at similar sort of themes, but this also brings into mind the internet as a sort of as a way that we use to figure out what we make of art, and the problems there is within that, how things get kind of muddled and misinterpreted, and everything gets homogenized, but we're aware of everything all of the time. That's part of it. So it's this sort of massive mix of history, reality, everything's fractured. And so that's and AI coming into the mix. That's all of this is sort of culminating into this body of work that I'm putting together at the moment.
Very cool. Awesome. Is there like an aspect of research that goes into the development of these ideas? Do you, whether it's in terms of the aesthetic that you want to go with, or in terms of the concept and the history involved?
It's a massive collection and using that index and using the internet, and that's where it comes from, because I use it more than I do most things now to figure out where my next direction is. And so I'm aware of all the falsehoods and all the way that things aren't properly categorized, and I find it rather amusing how everything's just become a history-ish. It's history-ish. It's not quite properly sort of labeled, especially if you're looking on Pinterest. It's like, it's very unreliable, actually. But there's something wonderful about that. I feel like, in another 100 years, we probably, I don't know, I think that we might have lost all sense of time and place, and everything will just get completely jumbled up. But that's all right. I mean, civilization just changes. You can't help that. But I think we're coming to a kind of a crossroads, where we might have lost, we might be losing our sense of direction and place, and everything has become so fractured. It's impossible to know where we are in the world,
Absolutely. Taking another step into your process, I know that you use photo shoots a lot as just a way of capturing poses and ideas. Do you tend to go into these photo shoots already with a strong sense of what you're aiming to capture, or does a lot of the discovery and exploration of ideas take place during the photo shoots?
A bit of both. So I often have a strong idea of what I'm going to do when I get there, and then I don't ever manage to do that. Something else will come out of it. And so it's a lot of error, trial and error, but eventually something sticks. And it's through the evolutionary process of taking those shots in a day. When you put on that costume, you inhabit it, you kind of get a sense of, how ridiculous the whole thing is that you're actually doing it in the first place. And all of that. And, my wife and I have a lot of fun doing it. And, she's taken on quite a lot of the masculine roles this time. I've taken on some of the feminine roles. It's, nice. Which is fun. And, so it's just been, I try and let it happen. My son's really very good at posing as well.
Really?
I feel like because he's grown up around all this nonsense, he takes it on. He's better than both of us combined, And I think, my wife's fine with it also doing it because, she used to be a model. And so, she's used to knowing what she looks like, in a photograph. And so, she's great as well.
So it's almost like that photo shoot is part of the collaboration that goes into the final work.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Okay. But then obviously after that, you remove them from the context, you put them in another context of the painting, you then distort it. It turns into a whole nother thing once it becomes digital, and I start messing around with it and, Photoshop and creating sort of digital collages essentially that I then work up from it. Everything always has to go back into a painting as far as I'm concerned, because that's the starting point, that's the end point, It goes through a lot of other shit first, in between, but then it always ends up as a painting again,
And so the costumes, do you make those yourself? Do you thrift? How do you source the costumes?
Yeah. I mean, some of them I start with a base, and usually they're kind of like a coat, and that I then start to adorn. Or sometimes completely from scratch, you're just using plastic bags. Cardboard is another very useful material that I use to make kind of epaulettes and various other things with. Ruffs are made out of plastic bags, or bits of paper, just anything really, anything that I have around. Sometimes I feel like, the more sort of recycled, the better, because, it adds to the ridiculousness of it all. So,
yeah,
yeah, especially when you're portraying these very, very rich people. I love sort of taking them down a peg or two by just making the shit out of plastic bags. I think it's really funny.
Right. Well, I mean, that also kind of subtly reinforces the idea of how a lot of history is just a facade anyway. I mean, it's...
Yeah. Yeah, most certainly. I mean, there's
not what it seems.
There's a lot of mythology, in portraiture. And I've been very aware of, how to create your own myth, People don't know I'm a very short person. I'm in a painting. It doesn't really matter. You create your own myth. It's, that's it, you build up these constructs around you. Yeah, it's fun.
And so you mentioned as part of developing the composition even further, you do some amount of digital composition. So how do you tend to work through that to the point where you're ready to start painting?
So it's a lot of as I said many times before already, trial and error. So you start off with collaging this thing into existence. So the person gets dropped into another painting. You have to take out other elements of the other paintings that you're using. Sometimes you combine several paintings to make another background. You obviously take out various figurative elements that you don't want to add in your figurative element. I tend to start off with the composition looking like it could be kind of a serious painting. And that's the point where I like to mess around with it. And that's when I start distorting it and ruining it and making it seem silly, because that's the fun bit. But yeah, it's tough to know exactly what I'm trying to do when I start doing it. And I think that's a good place to be at, is don't have too many set ideas prior to the point where you start ruining everything.
For the painting part of the distortion process, how does that usually work? Do you tend to render the entire painting and then just drag? I've seen the squeegee, like on your social media, you have the squeegee tool.
Yeah.
Do you have everything just fully rendered and then distorted?
Not entirely.
Okay.
Sometimes the ones that I have done recently, the shape canvases, they have to be fully rendered. I have to know exactly what I'm painting on where. There's always a certain degree of like choosing what you're going to sort of properly concentrate on when you start doing those paintings. So it never looks exactly like the image that I'm trying to work with. I'm just taking parts of it. It's like being a caricature person. You just take, parts of it that you want to make bigger or more interesting or bolder or saturated, and that's the fun part for me when I'm actually painting it. How I then choose to work this into a painting. But yeah, other times I'll paint a portrait and then just destroy it, after I've spent ages painting it perfectly. That's also fun. And sometimes the distortion happens throughout the various creative decisions you make throughout the picture as well. There was a point where I was started doing the painting, and then I would take photos of that painting and then destroy the image that I took, the photographic image, after I printed it out, and then paint that over the thing. And so it then became kind of a 3 steps twice removed by the end of the painting. That was another way I did it. And the shape canvases, because they're very labor intensive, like creating those things in the first place, especially doing a great number of them all at the same time. And the amount of woodwork I have to figure out to get the edges nicely and all of that kind of business, the gilding. And
do you do the shaping yourself, or do you have?
I do, yeah. I do it all myself, and that's also the fun of it. I think, for me anyway, is to be in control of all parts of the process, and it's through figuring out those parts of the process you might figure out another avenue for your work to go onto. So if you got someone else, you just commission someone else to do those bits, then you wouldn't do any of the learning that comes along with the, getting it wrong and doing it again business.
Introducing that element of the shaped panels, does that mean that you have to have the image worked out that much sooner in order to shape the panel in the right way?
Yeah, you do, yeah. It has to be the whole composition has to be figured out properly before you start. So, and then drawing it up properly so it fits that shape and all that, and all the parallel lines. It's just, it's very labor intensive. But as I said, for a good joke to work, it has to be executed properly.
Right,
so it's all worth it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And so like in the early days of kind of figuring out the distortion process, I mean, there's a lot of risk in that, and it takes a lot of courage to build render an entire piece and then scrape something over it. Were there days where you just irreparably ruined something and like ended in tears before you kind of mastered that?
Oh yeah, you should ask my wife. Yeah, no, she's had to put up with all the nonsense from all the fallout from that. Definitely. And once I've done it, first of all, as well, I've made that decision. I'll hate it initially, or I might try and redo it, and it always goes wrong. And, it just, the thing is, what you've got to do is just do it and then just leave it. It's very difficult to do that, especially when you spent so bloody long on doing it properly in the first place, then doing it. But that was the point. It's the point to do that. The point is to ruin something beautiful. That is the point. So unless you're doing that, then you haven't done it right. So
yeah, committing to that. I mean, that takes a lot of courage. That's amazing. As much as you seem to like to experiment with, your creative techniques, are there other mediums that you'd like to explore someday that you haven't had the opportunity to?
There's bits that I want to go back to, like all the glass sculptures and stuff that I've made in the past, various sort of topographical maps that I've made with portraiture on various layers of glass. I really want to get back to that. But it's like one of those things that you'll prepare it. I've got these shows every year, plus these other shows in between. You just don't really have a chance necessarily to go, I'm going to focus all my energy on this other thing. Right. Because, you have these sort of agreements that you make with galleries. Like they want this type of work. This is the work that we think is good for our client base and all of this. And so you have to, you have to deliver, basically. So, yeah, that's the issue.
Do you feel like that's still, because, we were talking earlier about the early days of your career and how, the galleries were kind of forcing you into a particular aesthetic. What you just said kind of reminded me of that concern about, having the gallery kind of inform the work more than it probably should. Do you feel that that's still the case, or is that?
I feel like I've got, I feel like as I'm in a different place in my career now, I can call the shots a lot more and say this is what I'm going to do, and I am very happy with where I'm at as far as as I said, creating this sort of visual language that I'm happy to maneuver within that structure, and I quite like that being not I don't see it necessarily as a limitation. It's just something that I can change incrementally to my own whims, And so and the thing is, I also realise that people are just getting to know the work, and that they're interested in this body of work, and I like that. I like the fact that they've only just got into it, they've only just found it, and you're talking to those people. And I've always loved the back catalogue of someone like Dali.
Yeah.
And he found his own visual language, and if he started doing something entirely different, I'd be like, why do you do that?
Right.
Yeah. You were really good at that thing, and it's really interesting the way that you chopped and changed it, but within a certain set of parameters, and that's something that I've got in my head. I don't mind that. Sometimes I kick against it. We naturally do, don't we? And sometimes you just I want to pack it in all together. But I've always got a voice of reason, i.e. my wife, next to me going, "Are you mad? Are you mad? Like, this is." You're so lucky to be where you are. You are so fundamentally lucky to have got to where you've got to, and why would you ever want to sack it all in?
Right.
And she's right.
So shifting gears a bit, and I'm glad this is a perfect segue. In addition to the personal gallery work that you do, you also did work with your wife as a creative directors under the name The Fashtons. I think that started in 2012. Tell me about that. How did you guys get into art directing?
Oh, well, that was through sort of Fee's line of work more than anything else. She started as a fashion photographer, but then moved more into music because she actually found music interesting. I mean, fashion's quite vapid, whereas she really loves music and loves musicians as a result of that, and so that seemed to suit her way more than it ever did with fashion. And for instance, I did the painting of the Rag and Bone Man's album art, and that was through a connection that Fee had with Sony Music, and that all comes about through those sort of avenues. And then we started doing music videos together as a result of combining both our practices. So I was doing a lot of the set deck work and figuring out the look of things, and she would shoot the movie and edit it, and so we worked like that alongside each other. It's just she then, after the project Rag and Bone Man, she became his artistic director,
nice.
Permanently. And she's done that for various other musicians now. And I always end up getting roped into various parts of the projects. And, we don't do it as much officially as we used to, but it was a really fun time. And that's when I said we started collaborating with Damselfrau and various other people like that. And, going off and down other avenues that you wouldn't normally go down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was wonderful.
What do you think about the difference or even the similarity in skills that are involved in what you did with the Fashtons versus what you make in the studio? Is there any overlap, or are they completely different, like muscles?
No, I think there's lots of overlap. And in fact, our technique, so her photographs tend to look like paintings. I'm the opposite. I'm, paintings that tend to look a bit like photographs. And, we've cross-pollinated with the dragging effects that she uses in photography, and how I use that in the King is Dead series. And so no, they haven't been entirely separate at all, really. They do continue to influence each other. I'll be doing something in the studio, she's like, I could use that on a photo shoot, and she'll just take that and use it there, and that's perfectly fine. And I think you can't be too precious that way. You can't go, this is my little area. No, it's all part of the same place. And we've always, either I've worked in the house and she's working right next to me, or we've got this new studio space now and she's often there beside me doing her own thing.
That's awesome.
And yeah.
It's great to have those kind of parallel, careers in that way.
Yeah, I'm finding it very strange. She's in LA at the moment with my son and doing a project there, and I couldn't come because I've got so much work to do. So yeah, that's what's happening. I'm feeling kind of bereft. I think I don't have these two constants that are always in my life. I feel quite at sea, when I don't have them around.
And so, speaking of all the work that you have, let's talk about your new show. I know that you have, a new solo show opening on April 19th, alongside actually former guest of this show, Matthew Grabowski.
Oh, no way!
Yeah. Not too long ago, I had him on. It's going to be opening at Dorothy Circus Gallery in Rome, I believe. What can you tell me about? I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but what can you say about this new body of work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've spoken about that. It's, as I said, it's sort of moving back to sort of portraiture but portraiture throughout the ages. Obviously with kind of hints of AI and, issues with the internet and the various distortions that come along with that, all of that. Dorothy Circus Gallery, a very interesting gallery that also have a space in London, but they have a space their original spaces in Rome. They started talking to me a few years back, and we finally got something in the diary. A lot of these guys show pop surrealism. Fundamentally, I never set out to be a pop surrealist artist. I have been embraced by pop surrealism. I'm fine with that. That's cool. It seems like a very nice group of people. All the artists I've met have been lovely. All the gallerists have been lovely. But yeah, the Dorothy Circus Gallery is interesting because it has these bizarre coloured walls. So, the one in London, it has got these sort of green, or is it blue, velvet walls, and the one in Rome has red velvet. So I'm intrigued to show on these coloured walls. And apparently, what I really respect about Alexandra, who runs the gallery, is that she had a critic complaining about that, saying you wouldn't last like a couple of years with this kind of nonsense, and she's shown them all wrong. I love that as a thing. Yeah, critics don't know what they're talking about.
Exactly. Does that play into how you approach the show? Is the environment that it's going to be hung in?
Totally, yeah. I'm always interested in what kind of route you move around the space, that kind of thing. The walls, definitely, yeah. And whether it's very high ceilings, this is quite an intimate space. I think the portraiture that I'm doing is more intimate. It's less sort of frivolous, like big full body things. It's more portrait based, and so yeah, it's completely kind of become a part of my decision making process. And I'll be interested in sharing a space with this chap as well. It's very different work, and I'm going to be really interested to see how it all goes together. We're going to be on opposite walls of the space, so I'll be on one side, he'll be on the other side, and yeah, it should be interesting.
Awesome. Does it have a title yet? I wasn't able to find one on various social media posts.
I've got a working title called Weaponized Nostalgia.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's the working title at the moment. It seems to fall nicely in with my feelings of everything at the moment, because I feel like we fall for weaponized nostalgia, right, as a society, as a group of people around the world. I feel like it's a one way that people use to trick us into doing stupid things.
Yeah, because there's such an emotional element to it, right? I mean, people use that to evoke these strong emotions in people to the point where they're ignoring more logical things. They're just not thinking.
And more to the point, it's fake nostalgia. It's none of these things are things that people can remember.
Right.
Or they might remember some of it, but they won't remember it particularly clearly because of the rose-tinted spectacles that we use. And so it can be weaponized in a way where it's really quite damaging. We make very, very, really silly decisions as a result of these things. And it leads to a very conservative way of thinking, which, we need to think outside the box continuously to solve the problems of this planet. And we find it much easier just looking backwards and going, let's just do what we did back then.
You're right. I mean, we have so many big problems and we've never solved them. So why would you think that going back to the way things were are going to solve any of them?
Precisely. But yet we always do. Yeah, without fail.
It's so backwards.
Yeah.
So, we're obviously still a couple months out from the show opening from when we're recording this. I'm assuming it's something that you're still actively working on. How much into it have you gotten?
Yes, I am. I basically nearly got all the figures in. And so this is what I tend to do. I spend about 2 or 3 days on each figure. And then I let that dry as it's oil paint. And then I go through all of them, do all of those, and then it's about, I'm working about 13 pieces. And then I'm going to do the backgrounds and then work more into the figure on the second go. Then it's dried properly. Then you can work into it. And then you have to do the glazing after that. So I feel like I'm in a good place. The last show that I did, I've completed it. I think I did 8 paintings in 1.5 months. And that was crazy.
That's wild.
And I never wanted to put myself in a position like that, but it's pretty much the same as that, but I'm just doing more paintings this time.
How many are you gonna have for this one?
I should have 8 to go into the show, but I'm doing more because it's always better to do more. Sure. And then you can go, right, well, those ones work better than those ones, or they work better as a group, so always do more. It's always a good idea. Even though it gives you major league anxiety continuously.
Well, the way you describe your process, are you working on all of them at the same time?
Yeah. Okay. You have to prepare all the canvases all at the same time, everything, all the gilding, everything, That must be stressful because,
you don't get that hit of, serotonin or that a sense of accomplishment until the very end.
Yeah, I guess so. I do actually get a hit of that sort of serotonin when I've done a decent day's work, okay. and you see a lot of change in a day. You get that's nice. No, you don't get to see the finished thing. And often when you get to the finished thing, you're like, oh,
you're over it by then.
Yeah. You've laboured over it for absolutely ages. You're never sure whether it's entirely complete anyway. You know that it's got to be done. It's usually a bit of a at the end. And now I'm glad to get it out the door at that point as well. I'm just like, oh, take it away from me. And so, I don't like a lot of my paintings hanging around the place. It's too annoying,
Did I read that you're working out of an old ironworks right now while you're working on the show? Interesting. Right. So, how does that? I mean, it looks amazing from what I've seen online. Is that just for this show, or is that your new studio going forward?
It is for the moment. I mean, nothing's ever for certain for very long in our lives. Basically, it's meanwhile use space, essentially. We were in another one, and that was rather like a shopping centre in another part of the town, but we got kicked out of that. We got served notice on that one. And this one, we met the landlord. He used to use it as a ironworks. He's an old school blacksmith, but he wasn't really using the space. The space is very leaky. The roof is just, it just rains inside. Wow. It's freezing cold in the winter months. My brushes were in ice when I was gessoing the panels. So I'm continuously wearing thermals, which is I don't know, I don't mind. You get used to it. We just don't know how long we're going to have that space for, but I'm going to make the most of it for as long as I can. So,
do you prefer working outside of your home rather than having a dedicated space in your home to work?
I need to. I just need to now because I need to produce so many paintings at the same time. I could only work on one at a time here, and I was working above the fireplace, and it's just it's a bit cramped. And prior to that, I was working in this tiny environment in London, and it was like a glorified garage, our place. And, it was one room on top of another room, and it was just tiny. And it's limiting, As soon as you move into a bigger place, in fact, you feel like you feel like it's too big when you move into it, first of all. It feels too grand and massive. I start to reduce the space around me slightly to make me feel a bit more hemmed in because you're not used to it. But then you soon expand into it and you start expanding your ideas to fit it. And it's different. It's a different way of working.
Very cool. Are you planning on attending the opening?
Oh yeah, definitely. The solo shows I definitely come to. The art fairs I try and make it to. A lot of the time. Some of the group shows I just simply can't. But Rome is, it's fairly nearby.
Have you spent much time in Rome?
No, never been. I've been to Florence, and that was a life-changing holiday. Like we went there. I went with my parents when I was in my 20s, and it completely changed my perspective on everything. Because of just this level of detail and ambition. The Florentine, golden age was just, and seeing stuff from like Masaccio and Cimabue from like the early Renaissance to seeing the unfinished marble works of Michelangelo, and the Duomos, and how much detail that you couldn't possibly fathom. Layers and layers and layers up until you can't focus on what's up the top, but you know that there's more fucking detail there, and it's just amazing. Just the ambition of being the top dog in Christendom. That was always the thing. Everyone was trying to outdo each other. I love that. That was really cool. And so I can't wait to see Rome. Rome's going to be amazing.
Awesome. Very cool. And anything else that you have coming up that you want to put on people's radars? Events, print releases, stuff like that?
There'll be another print release, I should imagine, after the show. Usually it's in like an off-peak period of time for me. I do, and it's usually something from the show. So I'll have to ask people on social media like which one they want. I always try and figure it out from what they think. There'll be a group show. I'll be showing with Kirsten again later on this year.
Nice.
Yeah, in October, I think. Might have a show, be part of a group show in London in June. I don't know yet. And then next year's LA.
Oh, wow. So you already have next year planned out.
Yeah, and I think I've got a plan I think I'm showing with Kirsten for another solo show the year after that.
Wow.
So that's 2026. So I know it's a bit like that at the moment.
Just lining them up.
Yeah, there's always something to work towards. Yeah,
that's a good problem to have. I have to say,
it's much better than me not showing anything, which that's what it used to be like. So I'm very lucky, man. I'm super lucky to be and privileged to even be asked to be on here. Like, this is amazing. Like, someone actually cares enough to ask me a whole bunch of questions about what I do. I mean, that's cool.
Glad you could be here. Where could people find you online so they can keep up with all this stuff?
Just my Instagram, Ben Ashton Art. That's probably the main place. I have a website, and yeah, it's Dorothy Circus Gallery. That'll be, they'll be showing a whole bunch of stuff about me soon as well. So yeah, just Instagram's the main place. That's my like dump of stuff that I'm doing. You can see my day's progress and my stories, that kind of thing. Yeah, I keep up with all of that. It's half my job, it feels like.
Right. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
All the artists that I really like are dead, so that's a shame. I think maybe Glenn Brown. I'd be interested to hear what he has to say for himself. I found his work fascinating over the years. That'd be super cool. I think he's the one that I'd really like to hear from, because a lot of these artists that have been sort of famous for a long period of time, they don't really have any reason to talk to anybody anymore, do they? I mean, they've already made it, they don't,
Yeah.
And they're from a different time as well, where you didn't, in fact, artists were secretive, and they kept behind the gallery. They didn't talk to people on Instagram, for instance. I much prefer this way of doing things. You actually get to talk to people. Otherwise, I get really lonely. I think it's much better this way. Reaching out and talking to people face to face. It's cool. But yes, if you can get him on the show, if you could corner him, then that'd be amazing. Yeah.
I will do my best. I appreciate the suggestion. But Ben, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ben. I found it so interesting to talk with Ben about the cyclical nature of history and how we as a people never seem to learn our lessons, falling over and over and over again into the same traps. Traps we often make for ourselves, in fact. That plus the way that we're presented this sort of rosy image of history in an effort to evoke these feelings of nostalgia and patriotism, ultimately for people to use that in service of an agenda. It's really cool how both of these things are at play in Ben's work, and how in a lot of ways his current artistic direction was sparked by a rejection of those ideas. To point a finger at history and say, no, that's not how it was, that's not stable at all. It's not something to yearn for or to romanticize. It's as flawed and problematic as things are today. Yet, you still have people reaching back for that to hold on to for some weird comfort. It'll definitely be interesting to see how Ben takes this idea even further in his next show. Tentatively titled Weaponized Nostalgia, the show's going to be all about this idea of people using nostalgia, and often a false nostalgia, and the powerful emotion that can entail to motivate an agenda or make people act against their own best interest. Ben's exhibition will be opening alongside former guest of the show Matthew Grabowski on April 19th at Dorothy Circus Gallery's Rome location. If you're anywhere near Rome that weekend, definitely drop in and check the work out up close. And if you go on opening night, you'll have the extra treat of being able to chat with Ben about it. Be sure to follow Ben's and the gallery's Instagram to stay up to date with the latest on that show. And it also sounds like Ben has a pretty full couple of years already planned out in the future as well, so definitely keep up with that. Thanks again to Ben for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.